Okay, welcome back to the Servlets demo. So in the first demo session, what we have seen is a simple hello world servlet example where the text hello world is being displayed on the screen from the servlet, right? Now we are going to take a step forward, and in this session what we are going to see is the user is going to be presented with a login screen with username and password text boxes and a login button. Okay, and user can enter the username and password, and when he clicks on login, the request is taken to the validate servlet where the user credentials are validated, and if the user is a valid user, the username and password are correct, it forwards the request to a success servlet, which then displays the message that the user has been successfully validated and logged in to the application message. And if it was incorrect, the username or the password was not correct, then the control is forwarded to a failure servlet where the user will again be shown a message that the username or password is incorrect. Okay, so for this session demo, I'm going to do it completely in the Eclipse IDE. Okay, so in this way you will also be able to know how to develop your servlet application using the IDE and what features the IDE has for you, what features the IDE provides you. Okay, so let's start off. So we are going to create a new project. Okay, and this is going to be a dynamic web project. Okay, so we need to name the project, give a name to the project. So I'll say Servlets project. Okay, click on next and select whatever default settings we have. Okay, so here is it. So let's see what the IDE has created for us. We've got a Java resources source folder, and this is the place where all the servlets and Java classes go into. Okay, so you build all your servlets and Java code in here, and the build folder has classes, and this is the place where all your generated classes will be put into. Okay, and we've got a web content folder where you can put in your HTMLs, JSPs, your web.xml configuration file, etc. Okay, so let's start off with building our login servlet. Okay, so before I can create a new servlet, I need to create a package. So I'll create a package where I'll add all my servlets to. So I'll call my package as com.sharadbalepu.servlets. Okay, so this is my package is created now, and let's create a new servlet in this package. So I'll say new, and I don't see servlets in this list here, so I'll say other, and you've got a list of folders here and options from which you can select, but what I need is a servlet. So in the web folder, I've got servlet. I simply select that, click on next, and give a name to the servlet, and the name would be login serve. Okay, click on next, and you can see that it has given a superclass of HTTP servlet. So my servlet would extend this HTTP servlet class. Okay, and the URL mapping is login serve, and this is the default. I won't be changing it, so my URL mapping for the servlet is login serve. So whenever this URL mapping pattern is matched, my servlet is going to be called, the login servlet is going to be called. Click on next, and here you have all the list of callback methods and the other options which you want available in your servlet class. So if you see that by default the do post and do get method are checked, so that means when my servlet class is created by the IDE, I'll have a do get and do post method already in there, right? So depending on your needs, you can check or uncheck the different methods you want to have. Okay, and simply click on finish and see what it generates for me. Okay, so as you can see that we've got a bunch of imports for servlets, and then this is my servlet class which extends HTTP servlet and implements servlet interface. I've got a constructor and do get and do post is also there. So all this code the IDE has actually put in for me, and there's no real implementation in it, so I need to put in all the logic, business logic, which I need in these methods. Okay, if you see here, we've got a couple of errors here. So it says that import java x.servlet cannot be resolved. Why do you think we got this error? We got this error because we don't have the servlets jar file included in the class path for this project, right, for this web application. So what we need to do is add the servlets jar file to the class path, to the libraries. Okay, so let's see how do we do it. Click on the projects, whatever project you're working on, that is servlets project, and then you have the project menu tab, and click on properties. In there you've got Java build path, and you've got a libraries tab there, wherein you can add all the libraries which you want to be available to your project, right? And I'll say add external jar, and my servlet jar file is present in the tomcat lib directory, right, which we have already seen in the first demo session. So I'll simply select the servlet API jar file from there and add it to the library. So if you see here, it's been added to the list of libraries here. Click on OK. Okay, so now if you see that it's compiled the servlet class again, and there are no more errors now. All the errors have vanished. Okay. So looks okay. So I'll simply copy the code which I've written for the login servlet. So basically I've written the code for all the servlets beforehand. I'm simply going to copy the code which I've written, and I'll explain what the code does, right? So there are some unused imports which I'm going to remove. Okay, so if you see here, what we have is the package declaration with a bunch of imports which I'm using in my class. Then I've got my login serve class which extends HTTP servlet, right? Then similar to the hello world example, I've put in all the print statements in each of the methods in this servlet class, right? So I've got the constructor, the init method, the service method, wherein I'm calling the doGet or doPost based on the type of request, and I've got the doGet method. So in this doGet method, I've put all my business logic implementation, right? I've even got doPost and destroy, where I simply give the print statement. So let's discuss what I have in the doGet method. So as we know that everything that goes into the out.println method is nothing but pure HTML. So, and we've discussed in the beginning that in my web application, the first page is going to be a login screen where the user will be presented with a username and a password, right? So I'm just going to build that screen on this servlet page. Okay, so I've got the HTML tag, body element, and I've got a form element. So this is one thing you might want to take notice on, because you've got the method attribute here which has a value of get. So that means the type of request this form is going to send is of type get. We'll just come back to this in a while now. So the main content of my file would be the username and password, text boxes, and a submit button, right? So I'm going to put that in a table. I've got username, and I've got a input text box with the name username, and max length is 10. Again, similarly, I've got a password label, and I've also got an input text box for password with a max length of 10 again. Okay, and if you see here, the type of this input text box is password, so that means whatever I type into this text box will not be visible to the user. You'll get stars kind of thing on the text box. Okay, and you also have the submit button, right? So this is my submit button, which is called with the name login, right? And with the value of login as well. Okay, so this is what is going to be displayed on the screen: a username, label with text box, a password label with text box, and a login button, right? So what does this form mean? What does this whole line form method is equal to get action is called validate serve mean? So basically, whenever in a web page you have a submit button, and this submit button, as you can see, is inside this form, right? So this form starts here and ends there. So all these things are within this form. So when I click the button, submit button in this form, the control is going to go to this form tag element, and it's going to see what the action is, right? So it sees that the action is validate serve. So that means that when I click on submit, the control is going to go to the validate serve servlet. Okay, so it's going to match this validate serve in the URL pattern and invoke the corresponding servlet. And the type of method which is going to be sent to that validate servlet is nothing but get. Okay, so right now we don't want to concentrate much on this part, because like we just want to display the login servlet for our first servlet page, right? So this login servlet class is pretty much similar to what we have seen in our hello world example, right? So nothing more than that in this login servlet. Okay, so let's see how do you run this servlet on the server. So but one thing, we've seen that in order to run your servlets in a web application, you need to have a web.xml configuration file, so that the web container can match the incoming URL pattern with the URL with the existing servlet, and then invoke the servlet which is going to serve the client request, right? But we haven't yet written anything in the web.xml. We haven't even created a web.xml file. But as I told you, the IDE itself is going to do a lot of things for you in the background. So the IDE has created a web.xml file for you. So let's have a look at it. And if you go to web inf, you see this file web.xml which the IDE has created for you. And here you have this servlet element, and the servlet class is com.servlet.servlets.loginserve, which is the servlet which we created, and it is given a servlet name of login serve. And the corresponding servlet mapping element for this, which has a URL pattern of login serve, right? So you also have this welcome file list here. So what does it mean? So if the client had not sent a specific request, or if the request sent by a client did not match to a specific URL pattern in the web.xml, what is going to be done is it's the container is going to call the files which are present in the welcome file list. So if it doesn't match, I simply give sharedbalepu.com without matching any specific URL pattern. It's going to see if I've got a index.html page in my web application, and if there is an index.html page, it's going to pick up that page and load that page, right? And if I don't have an index.html page, it's going to check for index.html. So similarly, all the files in this welcome file list is going to be checked on and displayed as a default file for your web application, right? Okay, so we've got our servlets, we've got a web.xml file, so we are ready to go now. But one thing we need is a server, right? So let's go ahead and create a servlet. So file, new, and then say other. What I need is a server. So I'll click on server, click on next. So we already have our Tomcat server, right? So I select the Tomcat server 6 and move my servlets project to configured projects, right? And click on finish. So first time it's actually going to ask you for your mapping of your Tomcat server. So you need to give the path where you install your Tomcat server. So it's going to map automatically. Okay. So here, if you expand the servers, you'll see that you've got Tomcat server there in there already, right? So what I'll do is right click on login serve, run as, and I'll say run on server, and I'll select Tomcat 6.0 server, click on next. Let it leave the defaults and click on finish. So now my server is starting and it has displayed the login screen. Let's change this to, I'll say my web browser is Internet Explorer. Okay, and simply run this servlet again. Simply say finish. So now it has opened the Internet Explorer page for me, and where my servlet code will be displayed, the HTML code will be displayed. So here it is. We've given a username label with a username text box, password label with a password text box, and a login button, right? So I can type anything in this username screen with a max length of 10. I can type anything in the password screen. It's not going to show the password, max length of 10, right? So this is our very simple login servlet, which is pretty similar to our hello world example, right? We just displayed something on the screen on our hello world example. Okay, so now comes the next part, which is going to be interesting. Okay, so if you see, have a look at the console, you'll see the order in which the methods were called. So first the constructor was called, followed by the init method, followed by the service, then doGet, and service and doGet again, because we invoked this class, the servlet, from two places, right? First I did it in the local, then and again I said I want to change it to Internet Explorer, and I ran it on Internet Explorer. So that's the reasons. So you can see that the init method was called only once, but for the first time when I ran it from my local ID instance, I got it went to the service and then doGet. And the second time when I ran it on Explorer, Internet Explorer, it didn't again do the whole thing of calling the constructor and then init method. It simply called the service and doGet method, right? Okay, so what happens now when the user clicks on submit? So when the user clicks on submit, the server is going to check what action you have for that form, right? So I see the action is validate serve. So that means the web server should invoke this servlet called validate serve, and what is the type of method it's going to pass to that method? I'm sorry, what is the type of method is going to pass to that servlet? Type of method it's going to pass is of get, right? And what are the form parameters? We've seen that in a request the client sends to the server the type of method, it sends the URL, and it also sends the form parameters, right? So the type of method is get here, and the URL is validate serve, which will be matched in the web.xml with the URL pattern. And what is the form parameter? Form parameter is nothing but the username and password. So whatever text boxes which we have in our page, in our form, and if you enter any value and navigate from that page to another page, all those values entered into the text boxes are going to go as part of the form parameters to the server, right? So since the validate serve servlet is called, let's create the servlet, right? So I'll say new other, go to web servlet, and I'll say servlet name is validate serve, right? Select the defaults, and I'm simply going to copy my code for validate serve. Okay, so here again you've got the imports, you've got constructor and doGet, doPost, right? So since the type of request was get, I put all my implementation in the doGet method, right? So what did I do in this doGet method? So we've seen that the username and password is going to be sent as a form parameter, right? But how do you get the value from that form parameter in your servlet? So you simply say request.get parameter, and you give the parameter name to get the value of that parameter. So if you see that the username input tag element, there is the name is username. So in order to get the value of this text box, I have to say request.get parameter username, and similarly for password as well, I've got the name as password here, so I'll simply say request.get parameter password, right? So I get the value of the username and password entered by the user on that screen, and I simply print out the username and password which was entered by the user. Here I'm going to do some validation. I'm going to check whether the username and password entered by the user were correct or not, right? And I'm simply using a static validation here, wherein I'm checking if the username is user1 and the password value entered by the user is pass1. So if the username entered was user1 and the password entered was pass1, I'm going to send the request to success servlet. Else I'm going to send the request to the failure servlet. So if you notice here, you see something different. How am I passing the request to success or servlet or failure servlets? So I am using request dispatcher to pass on the request to the success servlet. So we've seen that in the example tutorials earlier that there are two ways in which we can do you can pass a request to another servlet. So one is request dispatcher, the other is send redirect. So we've also learned that you generally use send redirect when you want to send a request to a servlet which lies outside your web application, but we are still using this in this scenario just so that you can see how this really works, right? Okay, so I create request dispatcher instance. If you see, request dispatcher is in the JavaX servlet package. I say request.get request dispatcher success serve. So this is going to match the URL pattern in web products and all for success serve. And I say request dispatcher.forward, and I pass in the request and response to that servlet. So one thing to note here is when you do a request dispatcher, you can send the request and response objects to the servlet to which you are passing the request to. But in the same case, when you are going with send redirect, you will not be able to pass the request which was passed by the client to the servlet which you are passing the response to, right? So this is one major difference between this. You won't have the request attributes when you're doing a send redirect. Okay, so these are the two different ways which we've seen in the tutorials earlier, and this is how you use a request dispatcher or send redirect, and we'll see how it really works, right? So here I'm simply doing validating the request, login, username and password sent by the user, and forwarding the request to success servlet or failure servlet based on the type of request. Based on the login validated result, if it was valid or not, right? So now I need to create a success servlet and a failure servlet. Okay, so I'll say right click, new, other servlets, and success serve. Okay, created a success servlet, and I'll simply copy my code for success servlet in here, save. Is there an error here? Oh, okay, so I've created even double C, right? So let's just retain that double C in here so that I don't have any errors, and even here I need to give a double C then, right? Okay, right. Okay, so I'll name this now. There are some. Okay, even in this validate sub, I don't need this right now because I'm not using it. Okay. Okay, so what we have in success serve, we simply display this text: congratulations, you have entered the correct username and password on the screen. When the control goes to the success servlet, this is what will be displayed on the screen, right? So that's the end of it, the end of your application. This is the end point when you hit a success. Okay, and what we have in failure. I'll create a new failure servlet. I'll say failure serve, right? Okay, and copy code for my failure servlet. And remove the unused imports and from here, right? Okay, so similar to the success servlet, we just print a message here on the screen which says sorry, you have entered the wrong username and password, and I also give a reference, say try again, which will take me back to the login screen where the user can again try to enter. And since this login serve is within the same application, I don't really need to give the whole path of this, so I simply say login serve, right? So it's going to match this in the URL pattern in web.xml and invoke my login servlet. Yeah. Okay. So now let's run this application. I'll say run on server. I didn't stop my server earlier, so I'll say restart server. Okay. So now you see that I've got the same login page, and I enter username as user1 and password as, I'll say pass. I simply entered pass, and I click on login. So it's giving me an error message saying that sorry, you have not entered a wrong username or password, right? So if you see here in the console, the constructor of my login servlet was called, the init method of my login servlet was called, and then the service and do get of my login servlet was called, followed by the do get of my validate servlet, and I displayed the username and password user1 and pass, and the failure do get method was called, which displayed the message on the screen. So when I click on try again, it's going to redirect me back to the login screen, and here I pass user1 and pass 1 now. So it should take me to the success servlet, right? So here if you see, it has taken me to a success servlet, and it gives me a message called congratulations, you have entered the right username and password, right? Okay, so here if you see my username and my password is passed in the URL. Okay, so even though my password was not visible on the screen when I was typing, it is here visible clearly on the URL which we can see, right? So why is this so? Because we use the method of type get, right? So because the type of method was get, it has passed the form parameters as part of the URL, right? And if we would have used a method of type post, this wouldn't have been the case. So I wouldn't have got this username and password on the URL if I have used post. So let's check that now, if that really works. So what I'll do is I'll give post here, right? And since it was post, my do post method will be called, right? So I'll put all my logic in do post, right here also. I'm going to put all my logic in do post. Okay, so we are done with that, and let's run this again. Restart server. Okay, so now when I say user1 and pass1, it should take me to the success screen. Okay. And here if you see, the username and password has not been appended to the URL, right? So that means even though the amount of data which you are sending across is not huge but sensitive, you still need to go with post, right? So that is about something about get and push differences and when to use what. You'll have to take security into concern as well. Okay, so next what we are going to see is I'll just show you how something about multi-threading, right? How multi-threading happens. So what I'll do is in my login servlet, I'm simply going to display a message. So before that, I'll create a instance variable called count of type int, and I've initialized this to 1, value of 1. Okay, and in my doGet method I simply display that. And println, I'll say this is request number, and I'll say count. Count is equal to count plus 1, right? So this is going to display the message. So instead of putting it on out.println, just before I start the form, I'll give this as out.println instead of system.out.println, so that it's displayed on my screen, right? So what this is going to do is every time the doGet is called, doGet method is called, it's going to display that this is the request number so and so, and it's going to display the value of count. So we've learned that in the tutorials, when two different requests comes in to a servlet from different clients, separate threads for the servlets are spawned and the request is passed to that, right? So that means the servlet instance is the same, right? So we just need to prove that we have the same servlet instance and two different threads spawned. Okay, so first I'll simply say run So I got a message here saying that this is request number 1, right? And if I refresh this again, the counter is going to increase, right? So that means I'm using the same instance, and again the doGet method is called on the same instance. So that's the reason the counter is increased. Now let me call the same login servlet page from Firefox. So this is a completely different session, right? So it's same as I'm sending the request from two different computers. So if the same servlet instance was used, then I should get this is request number 3, and if a new servlet instance is created, I should get this is request number 1. So I enter that, and when I click on go, I see that this is request number 3. So that means the same servlet instance is used, right? So even though I've created a separate session, I'm invoking a different session, it's using the same servlet instance, and only a different thread is spawned for my request. So this is one thing you want to make a note of when you're writing instance variables in your servlets. So be very careful when you're doing this. If you're putting any instance variables in your servlet, you'll have to make a note that this is going to be used across different clients, right? And the same value will be used. So I'll simply remove that now. Okay, so this is how basically this explains the multi-threading concepts in servlets. Okay, So one more thing is initialization parameters, right? So let's see how do you use initialization parameters. We've discussed in the session that you put in your initialization parameters in the web.xml configuration file, and the only thing you can do is you can read the value from the initialization parameters in your servlets, right? So in my validate servlet element, I'm going to add an initialization parameter, right? I'll say init param and say param name is password, okay, and I'll say param value is pass2. Okay, so it's created. So I added an init parameter with the param name as password and the param value as pass2. Okay, so how do I use this value of initialization parameter password in my application? So as you can see that this is a servlet init parameter, and this can only be accessed from the servlet validate serve. So I'll go to my validate serve, and instead of validating this with pass1, what I'll do is I'll say password is equal to, I'll comment out this, no, this should be there, right? So I'll say password config, right, is equal to, how do I get the value of the initialization parameter, not request? That is a servlet init parameter, right? So I'll say get servlet config dot get init parameter, right? And the parameter name is password. So this is going to give me the value of the initialization parameter for password. I'll simply print that out. And here it is, right? And here, instead of validating this with a static text, I'll validate this with the value in the init parameter. So let's see what happens now, right? So this is how you actually get the value from your configuration file, right? The initialization parameters. So you say get servlet config dot get init parameter. Similarly, if you want to use any servlet context parameter files, you say get servlet context dot get init parameter, and you specify that parameter value in the outside any servlet tags. So I'm going to run this. Server finish, restart, yes. Here I say user 1 and pass 1. So my initial first password was pass1, right, which I was testing manually, static parameter which I used for password. Click on login, it's giving me a error page, right? Because when I go to my console, I see that the username passed was user1 and the password passed was pass1, but the password in my configuration file is pass2, right, and it did not match that password. So it has given me a failure screen. Again try to give pass2 now, it takes me to the success page. Okay, and if you see here, the username was user1, password was pass2, and the password in the configuration file is also pass2. So it's able to validate my username and password, and it's taken me to the success screen. Okay, let me close these pages. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to show was keys. So we've seen that in order to maintain a session between client and server, the server basically sends a cookie to the client, and whenever the request comes back, then the client and server communicates via the cookie, right? And if cookies are disabled, then the server will go ahead with URL rewriting, right? So let's see that example. So how do you test that out? So what I'll do is you basically need to just write this line of code to create your session. Okay, so you say request dot get session. This will return you a HTTP session object. Okay, and import this statement, import HTTP session class, right? Okay, it's been imported now. So once you put this line of code in your servlet, what it does, the web container is going to check if there is any valid session associated with this user, and if there is a session, it's going to use that session. If not, it's going to create a new session for the user, right? So I'll just put this in. Okay, so now in validate serve, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out the value of the cookie. Okay, so how do you do that? Okay, let's do this in the success screen basically. Yeah, I'll give it as out.println statement here, and I'll say cookie is, I get the value using request dot get header, right? And the header name should be cookie. Okay, so this is going to give me the value of the cookie I have. Okay, I'll say clear, I'll restart, I'll stop my server, and server stopped, so I run this login servlet again. So I printed that statement in the success servlet, right? So I'll give a valid username and password, that is user1 and pass2. Now login, this says cookie is session ID whatever. So this is the value of my session ID, right? So that means there is a valid cookie present, right? And this is the session ID for that cookie. Now let's see what happens if I disable the cookies. So here in my Firefox, what I've done is I said accept cookies from a site, but ask me every time. Okay. So let me go to login serve, right here, and I'll say deny cookie. I don't want cookies. Okay, user1 and pass2. I say deny cookies. So you see here cookie is null. So that means if I when I denied my cookies, the value of cookie is null. So there is no cookie. So that means it has used URL rewriting to communicate between the client and server. Now I'll try to give another request here, and I'll say and this time I'll say allow cookies. Okay, and let's see what the output is. The password is pass2. I log in. See, when I said allow cookies, it has given me a value of cookie, and that is the JSession ID for me, which it has created, right? So this is how, if cookies are disabled, it uses URL rewriting to communicate back and forth, and if cookies are enabled, you get this cookie value in here, right? So I hope this concept of cookies are clear to you. It's clear to you, right? So I hope this pretty much covers what all topics we have discussed on the sessions earlier, right? Okay, thank you then.